Welcome to today's webinar on idea mining, something that is near and dear to me and something that is core to the success of a digital process automation program. I'm James Wilson, Director of Advisory, leading the Finance and Accounting Tower here at Ashland Partners. Will be today's host. Feel free to post any questions in the question section of chat, and we will have a few minutes at the end to address if we haven't throughout the webinar. The webinar will be posted online, and you will be notified once that occurs. So let's jump in. Today's agenda is short and sweet. I will define what idea mining is and why it's important. We will then pivot to a talented panel of automation professionals to discuss various approaches to support idea mining. We will then wrap up and address any questions that we haven't throughout the webinar. So, idea mining is really just a fancy way of saying you're finding the right ideas, assessing and evaluating them so that you're automating the right things. Intelligent automation platforms like UiPath aren't like other out-of-the-box software. If you buy an AP solution, for example, you know that you're going to be processing invoices, setting up vendors, making payments, and reporting out on that data. But automation is a tool and that layers across the entire organization and technology stack. You can target as many processes as your heart desires, but how do you go about doing that and ensuring you're automating the right things? There are several approaches. There are several approaches that the panelists and I will be going over to give you options to tackle this. The biggest thing is don't underestimate how much time and energy should be spent on this core COE pillar of idea mining. Also, idea mining doesn't just stop with what I would call ideation. Ideation is defined as the effort to gather ideas to automate. But just like mining in the real world, ideation is like finding that location where there seems to be abundant resources, setting up your mining equipment. Often after that, there's a lot of work to literally dig in, assess, and sometimes re-engineer the process so it could be ready to automate. So, when do we use idea mining? Well, these activities often happen early on your automation journey and takes up much of your COE's time at the beginning in order to support the investment and business case of an automation program. But the common pitfall is that people tend to think that they can stop there. And after the first few automations go live, ideas will start falling from the sky. Well, sad to say, that hasn't been the most COE experiences. And oftentimes you have to pick up your idea mining tools and head back to that mine to get next automations. Ensuring that you don't stop idea mining is a good way to avoid an automation pipeline without actionable automations. You never want to go back to an executive and explain why you have a team of resources to develop, but you don't have any ideas to hand them to develop. So, with today's esteemed group of panelists, we will be focusing on different techniques to locate and extract those ideas from the business. So let me go ahead and introduce the panel. We have Ryan, a Senior Director of the Client Principles, Al, Senior Solutions Engineer, and Hunter, Director of Client Principles, all from Ashland Partners. These folks live in the COE of many of our most successful clients and their automation programs. So let's hear from their successes on how to mine these great ideas. The topics that we're going to cover today are crowdsourcing of ideas, ideation or discovery session workshops, and a process mining program. All right. So, Ryan, thank you for joining us today. I'm excited to talk to you about crowdsourcing.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be a part of this panel here today. I know it looks like a nice day behind me, but it's actually a nice chilly winter day here in Chicago, but excited to chat with the panel.
It certainly looks tropical, but I trust it's cold. So So just introducing the idea of crowdsourcing, what tools do you recommend to help facilitate crowdsourcing of ideas, and how would you define crowdsourcing?
Yeah, so crowdsourcing is really kind of that bottoms up ideation approach. And it can certainly be driven in different ways, but the basic tools, as much as I really love sticky notes and paper bullet pointed lists, and those can be effective tools, certainly, within interactive sessions, you need a digital solution to be able to categorize and document and evaluate the ideas that are coming into your COE. So we've really seen two main effective approaches in our client base from Ashling. So the first and probably most obvious is UiPath's Automation Hub tool. So it does a really fantastic job of opening up the ability to submit ideas for automation to your organization. It's got some built-in workflows that you can create, some nice evaluation tools to be able to understand both the value side of the equation and the cost and complexity side of the equation for some potential processes to automate. And it's nice to have things all in one centralized spot. You can really use it to track the life cycle of those automations from ideation to actually realizing the benefits of automating them. So that's one big approach. The other approach we've seen is kind of I'd say the more custom approach. So we've certainly built out a number of intake forms and calculators and evaluation tools within our client base, probably going back to predating Automation Hub's existence, but a lot of folks are still using those type of tools. And an intake form can really take any shape, any type of tool, such as an MS form, a SurveyMonkey, Google Forms, whatever you're using to kind of survey and analyze results from people. You can tailor those to the needs of automation as well. The other thing I'd say, regardless of which approach you're going to use, we always recommend that the intelligent automation programs or the transformation programs we work with, they create an internal landing page for their program within their organization, so they can help educate and drive awareness of what automation is and what their capabilities are. But they can also really detail how to engage with their group for the rest of the organization. And of course, you can direct and drive folks to whatever that ideation area is, whether it's Automation Hub or a form, you can link right to it. So those are kind of the main, I'd say, required tools and recommendations.
Certainly, that makes a lot of sense. Having one location for people to learn about the program and submit ideas definitely makes it a lot easier than managing through email, for example. I mean, we're talking about automations, and if the automation program's taking ideas through email, that seems less efficient. So when I think about crowdsourcing, I guess I get a little concerned about the level of engagement. Everybody in the organization has a day job, and they're trying to get their responsibilities done. So how do you drive engagement within an organization to get people to submit those ideas?
Yeah, and I think you heard me mention bottoms up approach for ideation, but this is where a top down approach in terms of communication plan and education and incentivizing can really be helpful. Some of the successful examples that we've seen really are things like plugging into, let's say you have an existing finance town hall that happens on a quarterly basis, right? That's a really good venue to have your leadership help drive awareness of what you're doing in your intelligent automation program. And again, letting folks know how to engage. And it's kind of an opportunity for education there. We've also seen some pockets of innovation teams that actually sit within the business. So this is something that's been getting more and more common in bigger organizations. You might have a centralized innovation team, or you might have these sitting within the business. Either way can work, and that's a really good venue to plug into and get engaged with and partner with, because they have communication channels that can help drive this information out. In terms of actually incentivizing folks to submit ideas and qualified ideas, right? It's sometimes about quality over quantity there too. If there's a budget to actually help incentivize or gamify the ideation process, right? that's a great approach as well. I think, you know, you can gamify without not necessarily having budget to spend on it as well, but helping to reward those people for engaging with your program, I think is a really nice approach. And it all comes down to having that, you know, that executive stakeholder support.
Those are really great points, and it just reminds me how much of this core pillar in process identification really ties to many of the other pillars that we talk about at Ashland's COE model, such as change management, the strategy and vision. And it just, again, speaks to how important I think this pillar is, because it rolls into many different other areas of a COE thinking. So that's great. Let me ask you, so about some pitfalls. What are some of the things that you should avoid, and why?
Well, so it's interesting because you just mentioned how this fits into kind of the broader construct of COE pillars, right, and your center of excellence. And one thing that I think is a kind of a dangerous approach, right, would be we see pilots of automation with new technology, right? So let's say it's your first step in your RPA journey, for instance, and you do a pilot to prove out the value, right? To prove some success and then expand. You really wouldn't want to just move from pilot to broad ideation, right? Without having those pillars of your COE in place to be able to handle what's going to come next. So you don't want to put the cart before the horse in that situation. And this is not to discourage using pilots and proof of values, right? That's a really nice approach, but you've got to establish the foundation and the way of working and the governance structure and everything you mentioned before you kind of go broad within your organization. So that's probably the first one that comes to mind. In terms of, you know, COEs that are up and running and they're trying to ideate, I think another dangerous mistake would be to really dive too deep into one idea at a time. Every single thing that comes in, you can get bogged down quickly. It's going to be difficult to really scale and sort of identify those really high value ideas and processes if you're spending so much time on each one. So it's really where you want to develop an approach. And we mentioned the tools, right? Automation Hub does a great job of this, where you can sort of gather enough level 1 and 2 information about a process without drilling into that lower level process detail, right? To understand what this process is about, how much value it could create by automating it, how good of a fit is it for the tools that we have and the skill set that we have. So having kind of that quick evaluation and maybe even a scoring system is key. Because while you don't want to go so deep in one idea, you don't want to ignore any ideas either. You want people to be heard. You want them to understand how it works to engage with you. So we would really recommend things like using an automated workflow when your idea is picked up. Again, Automation Hub can do some of these things for you, but you can also get creative. And I think overall, I'd say transparency is key for your base of folks in the organization that are trying to engage with you. You really want to be able to share those results. You know, again, don't let any idea be ignored. Let them know it was picked up and kind of the results of the evaluation when that happens. Share those results, share a roadmap as broadly as you can so folks understand where we're going next. It'll also help them to improve their ideation going forward, right? They'll see the sort of business processes that are going to generate the most value and that the program is going to go after and try and help the rest of the organization. And that's going to spark better ideas for them in their own side of the business as to what's a good candidate for automation. So I just think that open communication, transparency, and really spending your time in the right place are kind of my key 3 things I'd say to avoid.
Okay, well, thank you very much for sharing. I think those are all great points. You'll probably hear a lot more about transparency in many of the other areas. I think communication is very important, something that we would dive into when talking about a change management and communication pillar within our COE model. But thank you, Ryan. I appreciate your participation. At this point, we're going to transition over, and I'd like to introduce Hunter. Hunter, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, James. Happy to be here to discuss some of tips and tricks that I've learned in leading discovery workshops in the past.
Yeah, great. So I kind of define this as the classical approach, something that's often done, to identify those pilots, maybe build that early business case to even invest in an automation program. But it is a useful tool to continue doing throughout the life cycle of an automation program. So why don't you go ahead and kind of tell us, how would you define these discovery workshops?
Sure, absolutely. So to me, discovery workshops are sessions that we hold with a small group of business leaders where we're looking to understand what their current processes are. So whether they're from finance, supply chain, HR, doesn't matter. We're meeting with these leaders, understanding what their current processes are, and more importantly, what are the associated challenges or pain points that they're facing with these current processes, so that we can identify where potential use cases for automation. As part of that, we're also looking to identify what the rough order of magnitude is of the impact the automation could bring to their business. So we're asking them to answer questions about what their current headcount is in that business unit, whether it's onshore or offshore, how many transactions they're processing on a daily, monthly, annual basis. All of this information is necessary so that we, one, can deliver a pipeline of potential automation candidates, but we also have at least enough high-level information to be able to determine which candidate processes we should look at first and focus on, and drill down into that next level of detail with the subject matter experts to really confirm automation feasibility and what the complexity would be. I would say one caveat to these discovery workshops is it's really important that before we go into these first sessions, the business leaders have an understanding of what automation is and what its capabilities are. So if you're going into a business unit for the first time or a new organization altogether and they don't have any automation experience, we really recommend that you do a pre-session to get them up to speed on what automation is, what are good use cases for automations, what are characteristics or common characteristics that make a process a good use case for automation. And what are some scenarios where automation may not be the best option? Maybe it's something that should be done by a citizen developer down the road, or maybe it's best handled by a programmatic update within the application itself. So setting that bar ahead of time really leads to a more successful discovery workshop up front, because you've given these leaderships, you've empowered them to be able to take their current knowledge of their processes and kind of do some initial filtering up front of, okay, this may not be a good automation use case. And that really lets you focus your entire session on those that are, most valuable to the organization.
Great. Yeah, that's really great. I would second that from my experience. Asking the participants to do a little bit of homework before coming to this discovery session really makes that time very effective, so that you can truly evaluate those ideas and then make some selections. Otherwise, it leads into, I think, a feedback loop of deep dives and follow-ups and all this other stuff that
Absolutely
can just take a lot of time. So that's a really great point. So tell me, how would you structure these sessions? How broad would they be? Cross-functional, focused? What would it look like?
Right. So typically, again, you want these initial sessions to be with a smaller group of business leaders. And I would say, you could keep it within one department, finance, for example, and bring in some of your leaders within finance and really get all aspects of the business together. So AP, AR, general ledger, et cetera, get them all together. They're all familiar with how they interact with one process to the other. So you're not limiting yourself from, one siloed viewpoint of the process, but you can really start building out automation potentials to take it all the way through the life cycle of that business unit. And so you're having these initial discussions, probably, no more than 2 or 3 hours, getting the group together to review and discuss these processes. And at the output of that, you have your initial pipeline of automation candidates. From there, that's when you really want to set up subsequent meetings with the subject matter experts and the process owners themselves, who actually know the ins and outs and the granular level of details on those processes, to where you can nail down, what are the step-by-step process steps for that particular business unit, and are there any potential red flags that will cause additional complexity to the automation that need to be known ahead of time? Because ultimately your true ROI for the automation is derived not just from what benefit it can bring, but also how long is it going to take to build, which is of course driven by that complexity. So in that initial discussion, you're really you're getting a good idea of what the value could be, And then in those follow-up discussions with the subject matter experts, you're nailing down what's the complexity, how long until we can get this thing built. And then from there, you know your true ROI, and that goes into your project pipeline or your funnel going forward.
Yeah, no, that's great. And kind of touching on the next question, which is the funnel approach. And I think you outlined that pretty well. So let me pivot just real quick. A lot of organizations have some partners, such as, continuous improvement groups or internal audit. Do you see that they have a seat at the table at that early ideation session, or when do you engage them?
I do think it's important to get them involved, especially on the audit side. If you can get them involved, the earlier in the process, the better, really, because ultimately they're going to have a say in, how your automation goes into production, and if it can go into production in the first place. And so the earlier you can get them involved in signing off on these automated processes, the less issues you're going to have down the road. I mean, you don't want to be 60-70% of the way through a build, audit just gets brought in for the first time, then has all of these issues with your automation, and all of a sudden, you're back at square one. So the earlier you can bring in those groups, the better. And it'll just really help eliminate some issues downstream down the road.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's, automation programs is something that certainly requires a lot of education across the entire organization. So the earlier you bring, even stakeholders that maybe aren't fully invested but just need to be aware, the earlier you bring them in, the better, and the better it is. Well, thank you for your time today, Hunter. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. At this point, we're going to pivot over to Mr. Alp. Welcome, Alp. Thank you for joining us today.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So Alp, want to dig into kind of process mining and how it fits into the idea mining. So maybe you can explain what is process mining as a tool, and how does it help with the concept of idea mining in an automation program?
Yeah, of course. So process mining is a tool that visualizes data and excuse me, it accesses the data of the system such as Oracle and an SAP, and then it builds a process graph based on that. The interesting part here is that it's an objective system data, so it's not depending on the interactions of one user, but you'll be able to see how thousands of users are producing this data and executing the process. The way it contributes to the idea mining is that once you have the process map, it really allows you to narrow down and then find the areas where you have the bottlenecks. So you can start with a holistic approach and then go to certain activities and tasks and actions that have high throughput time or high rework rate, and qualify the certain actions within that process for automation. And that's how it contributes to the idea mining.
Awesome. I think I love that idea. Getting some objective system data to really analyze. It's kind of anecdotally been my experience that sometimes the people who have been doing a process for 10 years are the worst at explaining it. I mean, they're on autopilot. They just know how it works. Every exception is just normal. And so it can be challenging sometimes to do that interview and walk through when somebody just knows it so well that it's just second nature to them. So getting some objective information straight out of the system, I think that's a great approach. So typically, what are the outputs and results of this kind of engagement?
So once we identify the system and process, the process mining tool allows us to automatically create the as-is process map. And that's what we call as also a spaghetti map, because we will all be able to see every single activity, every single action. So you would get a big map. Within that, you would see KPIs and metrics related to each activity, including throughput time, rework rate. You would see the categorization of vendors if you're interacting with different vendors. When do they deliver or do they do not deliver? You'll be able to build a business case with the dashboards So the software allows you to create an interactive dashboard where if you choose a certain area of the process, the dashboard automatically changes and gives you the automation rate, the KPIs related to your process, delivery rate, for example. And this allows you to later on qualify those automation areas. So those outputs end up turning into, okay, so I have this activity, how can I solve this activity's problem? So if it has really high rework rate or a long throughput time, that's perhaps an area that I should further investigate to see what is going on. And then that's how it ties to the results portion. I have the dashboard and then target it to find further automation.
Okay, that makes sense. And just to clarify, now when you analyze those rework, it doesn't always end up in an automation potential, right? This is where we cross the line a little bit into kind of continuous improvement activities, potentially retraining or those sort of things. But you know, I think it's important that it all ties together. As you know, just speaking from experience, as automations programs grow, I find that there does, you know, the automation programs does start studying into re-engineering of processes, even to make them automatable, which isn't really a word, but I like to use it. So I think this ties really well into it. But let me ask you, how do you know where to deploy process mining? Like where do you focus first? How do you know?
So we would hold a session with the customer to understand what are the pain points are. So there are two ways. Either the customer already knows the pain points, that they have something happening in the process, right? And then they're hitting their benchmarks, or they're hitting their term sheets. So in that case, we will target from the holistic approach, right? Let's get the process, and then let's figure out where the pain points are. And then that ties to the benefits discussion, that the customer may be trying to improve customer experience for their end users, or they may be looking to decrease throughput time. For that, then we will look for first the big processes like P2P, order to cash, or different claims processing in healthcare. They're good examples to start with. But once we start from that big holistic way, then we will drill down and then find different sub-processes and different actions. In some cases, we reveal, and then that's what they call as X-ray as well. It reveals process areas where you wouldn't expect that there were pains actually, and then it will also be called a health check too, that how your process is doing. So that's the first way to start, to going through where the pain is at, and then slowly drilling down into different process areas.
Great, thank you so much for sharing. And you tapped on something that I just want to quickly speak to is, you know, when we talk about the process in process mining, it's generally at a higher level, right, than like just say processing an invoice. It's more like the whole procure to pay cycle, right? It's kind of a higher level. Would you agree with that, Alp? Do I have that right? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's important to know as well. A lot of times automation ideas are at that granular level, but process mining kind of overlays a whole end-to-end process and can really help you know where to narrow down and focus. So I really like the objective data-driven approach. That way, you know, it saves time in terms of interviewing and deep dives with SMEs that maybe don't tell you the entire picture because it's just autopilot for them, right? So, well, thank you, Alp. With the few minutes left, I just want to wrap up and remind folks on the importance. So, you know, from an executive level point of view, I just want to kind of share why this is important for an automation program and some other considerations. You know, remember, ideas coming into the pipeline is a leading indicator of the health of an automation program. To put on an executive hat, that would be the metric that would help me gauge future funding of the program. If the pipeline starts drying up, that would cause a red flag, and ask, why am I continuing to invest in this? So ensuring that you have a healthy pipeline is critical to the future health. Make those activities that you're doing, make those idea mining activities visible and transparent. Ryan touched on this earlier in crowdsourcing, but I think it's important for any technique that you deploy to make sure that it's very clear and transparent how much time and energy and effort and what are the results of them is communicated to the steering committee and stakeholders throughout the organization. If it's crowdsourced, you want to go very broad so that people know that they're being heard and that their ideas are being looked at. And the steering committee needs to know that that pipeline is healthy. And one of the topics I briefly touched on in our conversation was make sure that you partner with some of the other groups. Depending on the size of your organization and how many different teams you have in there, there might be some groups already doing some idea mining activities. And just making sure that they have awareness of the automation program and are tapped into how to work with your automation COE is really critical. And just make sure that you're talking continuously with IT, Six Sigma or process improvement teams. Internal audit's a great place to go, and so just make sure that there's those lines of communication going, because you can really support each other if it's working well. So I know we're at time. I do see, I think we had a question, but it looks like it's been answered. And if anybody wants to stay on the line, feel free to stay on the line and ask any questions. As a brief reminder, Ashling Partners is the leader in UiPath automation programs here in North America, and we are happy to share our experiences and expertise with you all. Feel free to reach out to us via LinkedIn, email, or go to ashlingpartners.com. As a reminder, this presentation will be shared with the recording. You will be emailed and notified when it's available. It'll also be posted online on our website. And yeah, if anybody has any additional feedback, I'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, it looks like there's a couple questions, and yep, it will be shared. The recording will be shared, and you will be notified when that's available. But other than that, stay tuned for additional Ashling webinars, and thank you for your participation and joining us today.